Wisdom and knowledge in five, four, three, two, one. I'm Mark. That's Gordon. And we are just thrilled to bring on Kristen McLean. Kristen, welcome to the podcast. We're going to discuss the World Economic Forum and the WHO. But let's start out by getting a little backstory of who you are and take it away.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me.
Sure.
Um, so I have a background in psychology, a bachelor's and a master's. I was born in Alberta. My husband and I moved to the Middle East in 2008. We were there for 13 years. We traveled all around the Middle East, lived everywhere, and we ended up my husband was working in Saudi. I was in Bahrain with our two girls. The schools were better in Bahrain, so that's why we moved. And then the pandemic hit. Both our countries locked down. So we were separated for 9 months, actually. And he couldn't get out of Saudi. It was stricter over there. I couldn't get into Saudi. So we were just stuck in our separate countries. We finally were able to reunite after the 9 months, and it was just very hard to get there. So there's a bridge that's separating Bahrain and Saudi. It's very easy. It's an hour from his town to where I was. But with the pandemic and all the restrictions, it was super difficult. We weren't able to see each other for 2, 3 months at a time. We gave it another year, and then we decided to repatriate back to Canada. The restrictions were so intense, like we had the vaccine mandates in Bahrain. So the girls and I weren't able to go into grocery stores, clinics. It was very intense. And so we decided to come back to Canada, and also because we wanted to just reunite with my husband and not have to worry about getting from one country to another, and repatriated back to Canada, and just in time for the mandates to hit in Canada. So that's a bit of our story. I was asleep for the first part of the pandemic, and woke up right around when the vaccines were introduced, and I started questioning different things, and it was a hard and fast wake up. And that's when I just started delving into a lot of different rabbit holes and different things to get a bigger picture as to what exactly was going on here. And a huge reason was because I was treating child after child with severe trauma from everything that was going on with the pandemic. And not just a delay in academics, but a delay in language, their social and emotional health, and severe mental health issues. So I thought something needs to be done. I started uncovering the lies that were going on, and started speaking out.
Very good. You have a background, you said you have your bachelor's and master's in psychology. Would that be childhood psychology, clinical psychology? Psychology has different branches, so.
Right. So my branch is counseling psychology with a specialization in with children. Right now, I'm working as a psychoeducational consultant. Since we repatriated back to Canada, I do have the option to become registered in Canada. I have chosen not to because I've seen what's happened to, for example, Dr. Jordan Peterson, and you go through all that work. It's a long road to get registered, and it's a lot of money, and it can be taken away like that. And so I have chosen not to do that. I also am quite vocal in my community and online, and it's just gonna draw more heat to me if I become registered. It's just too easy to be taken away.
Right.
Yeah.
Now you talked about waking up, opening your eyes, so to speak, and you mentioned that it was when the vaccine passports first started rolling out. I remember the day well because it was the day of my wedding anniversary, or my wife and I wedding anniversary, which is September 22nd.
Mm-hmm.
And it was September 22nd, 2001, that the vaccine passport came into effect.
2021.
In what did I say? 2020?
You said
2021.
2001. So
Oh,
it's all good.
I'm old.
Yeah.
2021, when they came in September 22nd. And your background being in psychology, my epiphany, if you will, for starting to question things was with the branding of the virus as the deadly coronavirus. I had never heard of a viral pathogen being given a branding statement. And immediately I started to question that this isn't reporting anymore. This isn't information. This is propaganda.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, you're in Bahrain, you're in Saudi Arabia, separated by a causeway between the two. What was your access to? Was the information that you were accessing primarily coming from Middle Eastern authorities, Al Jazeera? What was your media? What was the information coming at you? What were the sources?
Yeah, so we were about 6 months ahead of you actually. So the pandemic hit around January for us. For you guys, it was about March, and then we had the vaccine passports hit. I'm just trying to think of dates. So they hit in March of, sorry, the end of 2020 is when they, and then March they implemented the vaccine, like very strict vaccine passports. So we were getting a lot of our news from Al Jazeera, like you had mentioned, and BBC. And we also had so my husband was awake long before me, and he had his ear to the ground. He knew that something was coming at the beginning of, before like everything locked down, the beginning of 2020, kind of towards the end of 2019. And he said, I don't really know what's going on. He was watching China. He was looking at a lot of the news sources coming out of China. And he's like, I don't know what's going on, but it's going to be something really big. And he said, we need to stock up in the house. And so he stocked up. I thought he was absolutely nuts. I was like, you're crazy. But as things started rolling forward, I was like, oh, okay, this is going to be bad. And we were watching mostly what was going on in China. And I'm sure you've seen the videos as well, like people dropping down on the street and like welding buildings shut. And I was like, oh my, I was scared because my husband was already in Saudi. We weren't really sure what was going to happen. And I'm not in my home country. So they very easily could do something like that there. So we're watching the news, and then that's when both the countries kind of locked down and shut down. And there was, I mean, it was fairly traumatic. They had a white van that would drive around our community, and if anyone tested positive, you were given no choice. You were taken to a COVID camp. That was it, in the desert. That was it. And we saw pictures of this COVID camp, and it was awful. Absolutely awful. And of course, I'm with my two young girls. I am absolutely terrified. So I've made contingency plans with some other families that we knew there, some of our friends, gave my girls my old cell phone and said, program their numbers in there. You call, if I'm taken away, you call and let these families know, and they'll come and get you. And they were prepared for that. But we were prepared for anarchy. There's a few of my friends over there that became really close, like family almost. And we just had these contingency plans, like if things go awry, if people start going crazy because of lack of resources, lack of food, because of the lockdowns, all that sort of stuff, like this is what we're going to do. We're going to, we're going to go to this person's house. We're going to stay together. I was worried about my safety, worried about my girls' safety. So sure. It was very, very intense. Yeah, for a while there.
And then, so you, to use your phraseology, you woke up to what was going on, and take us down the rabbit holes as you went down them. When did you start connecting the dots to the World Economic Forum, to World Health, etc.?
Yeah.
Okay, so I really started to question things when they started talking about this vaccine and how it was going to be this end all, be all, save everyone. And I was like, well, wait a second. I started questioning. I said, this is brand new technology. It's a brand new vaccine. There haven't been any long-term studies. how do you know it's safe and effective? I don't understand. And I'm a very, like, because of my background, research person, like, let's read the papers, let's see the data, like, show me. And anytime I tried to question it, or anytime anyone else tried to question it, you were immediately a conspiracist, you were an anti-vaxxer. And I was like, what? Like, you can't ask any questions? That doesn't make any sense. That's science. And then we were privy to the information that was going on in Israel. So they were the first country that was like kind of Pfizer's
testing ground.
Yeah,
testing grounds, exactly.
exactly.
And so then the doctors started speaking out there, and they started publishing papers, and I was reading the papers, and it wasn't preventing transmission, and people were still getting really sick after the vaccines, and they were bringing in the mandates, and it wasn't helping. And so then they started talking about bringing it into Bahrain and then bringing it into North America. And I was like, well, if it's not working there, what makes you think it's going to be different here? Like, I don't understand. And so that's when I began questioning. And then my husband had always gone on about Tedros, and
Yes.
just, yeah, and like he's corrupt and he's this and that. And I was like, are you sure? Like, I don't know. I never really paid attention to it because it didn't affect me.
Right.
And then once it really starts affecting you, and once you start opening up your eyes, you're like, wow, it is really corrupt. This is like nothing to do with health. This is very political, and it's very corrupt.
Sure.
And so the big draw for me was the big eye opener was the studies, the research at first, especially in Israel, and then as it spread to like the UK and the Middle East, and then to North America. So there was that. There was questioning a lot about the WHO's decisions. You look at countries like Sweden, who didn't lock down, and they had better outcomes than we did.
Yep.
So that was really making me question a lot. And then I kept hearing about the World Economic Forum, And I was like, people were asking me about it, and I was like, I just don't know enough about it to comment about it yet, but it's my next rabbit hole. So I pulled up the document for the World Economic Forum. I'm not sure if you've looked at it, but it's like 40 plus pages, like very tiny print. And I was like, let's just go through this with a fine tooth comb. So I did. And they make it sound like the 15-minute cities. Everyone's talking about the 15-minute cities, and they make it sound like this glorious place. But when you look at the fine print, there's a lot of your freedom that you're giving up. So for example, it's, okay, you're going to be in this 15-minute city. Everything is going to be within walking distance and sounds fantastic. Okay, but then there's barriers. So you can't leave your 15-minute zone. Like, you can't leave that zone. You can only leave a certain amount of times. Now, I read it's 100. It could have changed by then because I read the document a while ago, but it's 100 times a year that you're allowed to leave. And then after that, you have to ask permission.
Or
Like,
pay a fine.
Cold day in hell. Sorry?
Or pay a fine if you're.
Yeah.
And I was like, cold day in hell after what's happened over the last few years, that I'm going to be asking the government, who is completely corrupt and lies. We've caught them in so many lies. I'm going to be asking them permission to go see family, friends, go to work. Are you kidding me?
Well,
Yes.
you left Bahrain, which is part of the UAE, United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia. These are not democratic countries. These are emirate states, are kingdoms.
Mm-hmm.
There's a royal family governing them. And you must have thought, well, I'm going back to a haven of democracy. And you find yourself back in Canada, which is being governed at this moment by Justin Trudeau, who famously told Canadians and anyone in the world who had their ears on, in September of 2020, he addressed the UN and said, this pandemic is an opportunity. This is our chance for a reset. This is our opportunity to put the world on a path towards sustainable development. And this word sustainable development, it's Machiavellian. They have a goal, and no matter what horrible things it does to individual rights, freedoms, liberty, well, the end goal of saving the planet is worth it. What do you think about the idea that the planet is overpopulated, that we consume too much? Have you examined those at all?
I have. So, I mean, it's the perfect, you see these, what the predictions were in like the 70s. It was like, in 10 years, there's going to be an ice age. And then in 10 years, there's going to be this. And nothing's happened. The only thing that's happened is that there's been more taxes for us. Is the only thing. They can't even predict the weather for tomorrow efficiently.
No.
Seriously. So, I mean, I've completely lost trust in not just the government, but pharmaceutical companies, like any of these higher ups and these elites. I completely lost trust because I've just caught them in too many lies. They don't have our best interest in heart. I used to think that. I used to think they're doing the best that they can. They're trying to look after us. They're not. They have their end goal in sight. They're looking after themselves.
Well, everyone will know that the World Economic Forum, there might be one or two people watching this who will not know, but the World Economic Forum is something of a confluence of government, industry, and academia. And the three have come together to kind of push this great reset, fourth industrial revolution, what I call the Fourth Reich agenda, forward. And now, in terms of the academic side, they have gone to institutions like the University of Texas and others, and they've published papers saying that the planet Earth can only sustain 2 billion people or so over the long term. And the reason they say that we are able to have 8 billion people on the planet now is because the planet had reserves of energy and resources, and that those reserves are now largely depleted, and that unless we institute draconian measures to ameliorate this situation, that we're going to be facing deprivations of biblical scale within 10 or so years. By around the year 2030, we're going to have shortages of water, shortages of things like potash for fertilizer. And so there's this narrative, which I don't think gets spoken to enough, that, and I myself, I do not believe it, but when you're confronting an agenda, you need to walk in the shoes of your enemy. And this is what the enemy is saying. And they're not stating it implicitly in what they're doing. They're trying to do it under the guise of climate change, and we all know climate changes. You know, they're trying to do it under all these different guises because they can't come out categorically and say, well, ultimately, over the next 10 or so years, we need to dramatically reduce the human population on the Earth.
Right.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, at first I would think like absolutely nuts. Like before I started looking into this, like absolutely crazy, no way. Now, 100%. And I feel like, I really feel like they're trying to control us and what happens, definitely control the population, but they do that out of fear. And we saw that with the pandemic. And so like after I woke up, I was like, this is so, it's terrible, but it's fascinating from a psychological point of view to be able to control such a large amount of the population, and for them to do such horrific things to other people, wish death upon other people, and all the other things that we saw happen during the pandemic. It was out of fear. They instilled such fear that it was like a life or death that a huge part of the population was going through, was thinking. And I think that's exactly what they're going to do with this as well. They're going to control people with fear. The ones, especially who are not wide awake, who are not looking at this reasonably and like reading the data on this and looking at this, they're going to control them out of fear. And people are going to do whatever it takes because they're going to be scared.
Yeah.
You have a background in psychology. I do not. I'm a lay person. I did take Intro to Psych 101 at university, but I didn't pursue it. My background is more in the humanities. But the question I would have is, what, from a psychological perspective, what does fear do to people's behavior? What is the impact of fear on children and on adults?
So what I saw was like fear, you have a fight or flight response. And so that is what we saw during the pandemic. We saw people absolutely terrified, and then they responded with many responded with violence and aggression.
Yeah.
So that we saw a lot of that during the pandemic. I mean, I hate to compare it to what happened with the Nazis, but it was very similar. People did insane things because it was the right thing to do, because the government said so. But if you would look back on it, if you would look in retrospect, you see that that's not the right thing. Like, even if the government told you to, it's not the right thing to do. Like, just stop and think, like, calm yourself down and think about this rationally. But people didn't. They're terrified. And so they respond with this fight or flight response. What we saw with children was that, and it's with adults as well, but what I saw specifically with children, because I work with them, is they're under a sustained amount of pressure for a long period of time. And so this delays their cognitive not just their cognitive development, but it delays their social development. It delayed their academic development, their speech, all different areas, because they were under such stress and such anxiety for such a sustained amount of time. Too long. At the beginning, you know what? I'll give it to them. We didn't know about what the virus would do. We didn't know how it would affect anyone. We didn't know how serious it was. But when they knew, they should have done something differently. They could have handled this differently. But to put, especially those kids, under the amount of pressure and stress that they were under for 2 years, we're just now emerging from it, and we have such a mental health crisis from it.
Well, the thing that I've often said, and probably speaking out of turn and totally getting out of my lane, is that, you know, your higher thought processes exist in your frontal lobes. I forget the proper medical term, hypothalamus, whatever. I forget the different quadrants of the brain, but the frontal lobes, this is where your higher thought processes take place.
Right.
And under periods of stress, when you're in a fearful state, those frontal lobes more or less shut down. And you resort into this, you know, animalistic.
Exactly.
You go into this, as you say, the fight or flight. And I hadn't thought myself before about when you do this to a child these frontal lobes are where they are developing. This is where they're learning to think, learning to reason, learning to process information, the world, language, all of it. And when that, I mean, what has it done, not just psychologically, but physiologically to the brains of these children who have endured almost, I consider the entire thing from start to finish, and it hasn't finished. Start, ongoing. This has been a psychological operation.
100%.
And how do we get people to re-engage with their frontal lobes, to re-engage with the ability to think and process? Because not everyone is in on the agenda.
Right.
There are a lot of useful idiots who are going along with it. You know, there are doctors now still saying you have to have a mask on if you want to come visit if you want to come into my practice.
Right.
And I put them as, these are the useful idiots who are helping to sustain this agenda. They're not in on it, but they're playing along. And how do you get these individuals to re-engage and get out of this fight or flight response? Any thoughts?
Yeah, so they're complicitly silent is what they're doing. Complicit, and they're being complicit because they're being silent and they're going along with it. It's just like, for me, I'm very much solution based. So it's why I decided to speak out. It's why I decided to kind of put everything out on the line and on the table. Like in my profession, and same with doctors and so many others, you're supposed to be advocating for people. You're supposed to be protecting people, and you're not doing that when you're complicitly silent. When you know that something is going wrong, something is wrong, and you're not saying anything, that is, it's the worst thing, especially in your profession. Anyone else who's doing it, I mean, that's wrong as well, but in your profession, you've taken oaths.
Do no
So
harm
exactly. So
and preserve life.
exactly.
Mhm.
So I mean, for me, I think it's just continuing to speak out, continuing to, like, since I've built quite a platform on Instagram now, and I
Yes.
do speak
Sure.
out a lot, and I get a lot of messages saying, like, thank you for speaking out. I wish I could do the
Sure.
same. And it's just encouraging those people to be like, you can, though. You have a voice.
Mhm.
What are they going to do if we all stand up and say no? That's it. It ends.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Right? So to be complicitly silent, and there are the few people that are still very, very asleep. I'm sure you know.
100%. Yeah. I mean, I saw somebody here today, before this podcast, driving with a mask in their car, 90-degree heat in North Carolina. It's crazy. One thing I wanted to ask you is, they also played into politics too, because people were
Mhm.
so political, and people
Yeah.
that weren't political bought into this
Right.
COVID thing. And then in the US, you got it. Oh, if you're not wearing a mask, you're a Trump supporter, or you're this. And even people who used to stand for freedom, like liberals who used to stand for freedom, bought into this thing left and right. And a lot of them don't even know, what the World Economic Forum is, or the WHO. How do you wake these people up?
I mean, it's really hard if you don't want to see the truth, if you don't want to look, you're not going to find it. And I think my husband and I actually were talking about this today, and he said, people, like, the majority of people are smart and they're clever, and they have a right, or they have the obligation as a human being to look at the evidence in front of them, not just follow along what people are saying, but to look. You have that obligation. I think deep down people know that there's something wrong. I think a lot of people know that there's something wrong, but they don't want to uncover the lies, right? Because I don't know what your awakening process was, but mine was quite traumatizing. I was like, oh my gosh, everything I've known from when I was a child is pretty much a lie.
Yeah.
And you just go down these really dark rabbit holes of like, oh my gosh, you vacillate between, okay, we're going to be okay, we're going to fight, we're going to do this, and then, oh my gosh, we're all going to die, we are so screwed.
Yeah.
And so I don't think people want to open their eyes to that. They know something's wrong, but I don't think they really want to face that.
And what's so funny is they put it right out in front of you, and sometimes they'll delete tweets, the World Economic Forum, like when they had that jobs reset. Gordon, do you remember this? They put out there saying, advocating for the vaccine passports and saying that your jobs are going to mandate this, and jobs reset 21, the hashtag. And then they delete it right away.
Right.
They'll put things out with supply chain shortages, and it's just so crazy. And one thing that Gordon forgot, he's talking about all these people with the World Economic Forum. You forgot the rock stars, because Bono has been there too with the World Economic Forum. They used all these puppets, so to speak. And I wasn't awoke to who Bono was, or I thought U2 is great music, and then you see all these musicians and they're all in on it. It's ridiculous.
It is. It's crazy. It's crazy when you open your eyes and start to see what is going on in front of you. It's hidden in plain sight.
Yeah.
A great, a very popular line, but I wanted to talk to something you touched on. And this is the idea of people not wanting to wake up. To the extent that when you think about the fabric of society and the way things operate, so much of the way this world functions is on trust. Look at the currencies we use. All the currencies in the world, the US dollar, Canadian dollar, the euro, the British pound, whatever, they're all what are termed fiat currencies. There's no gold standard, there's no silver standard, there's no Fort Knox with assets backing these currencies up. They are based on our perception of their value. And there's, it's the emperor's new clothes is what our currencies are based on. And our entire society operates on this trust. And what happens when the trust is eliminated, when we lose trust in our government, in our health officials, in our law enforcement, in our legal system, if we lose trust in all of that, what happens to society?
Right.
I mean, it's, and I wonder to what degree some people have gotten to that line and have said, you know what, if I walk over that line and I eradicate my trust in all these institutions, well, then how is the world going to function? So I'm going to consciously decide to continue to place my trust in them, even though I'm leery, I'm going to go along to get along.
Exactly. I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that that's a lot what a lot of people are thinking. And innately, I know a lot of intelligent people who are just, their head is buried in the sand. And I'm like, innately, they've got to know that something's going on. They've got to know, but exactly like you said, they don't want to step over that line. It's going to rock that boat too much. And then what do you do? Like, I know when I woke up, I was like, I don't trust anybody. I don't trust.
Exactly.
I really have to question all the doctors. I have to question everything that people have told me. And I mean, it was like, I'll touch on our doctor actually so I met her in Alberta and I didn't seek her out. I didn't know what her views were or anything like that, but she essentially, I went to go see her and, we had just gotten, the girls and I have two girls, we had all just gotten over COVID. We didn't even know we had it, by the way. It was so minor. And I just wanted to, they were competitive swimmers. So I just wanted to make sure that everything was okay and they were okay to go back in the pool. And she's like, everything's fine. She's like, the kid, like, it's not affecting the kids. And she basically went on to say, like, and she started talking about the vaccine specifically for children. And this is why I'm not promoting it and all this. And we ended up having about a 45-minute conversation. And I went over like all the research articles that I had read about the vaccine specifically for children, but with the general population. She just validated everything.
Wow.
And she was like, you're not, I told her, I'm like, I feel like I'm crazy because everyone's telling me I'm putting my kids at risk. I'm a conspiracist. I'm an anti-vaxxer. And it's like, I'm getting this from like people that I trust, family members, friends. So I'm like, I feel like I'm crazy. Like, I don't want to put anyone at risk, but it's just not making sense. She's like, you have every right to question. I question it. I'm not vaccinating my son. She said, you're absolutely right. Like, what you're reading is absolutely correct. She's like, I will not promote the vaccine to anyone unless they're significantly at risk, which is, as we knew, over 70 or have severe comorbidities. We knew that for months. Yeah. So it was just, but it was a shame because we got to that point of like, she was too scared. She's like, she was in her early 30s. She was pregnant and she had a 3-year-old and she's like, I'm too scared to speak out because I can't lose my job. Like, this is my livelihood. And there's so many and she said, there's so many like that. A lot of her friends who are also medical doctors, they all know what's going on. They're too scared to speak out.
Well, we've jumped all over the World Economic Forum, the WEF. We haven't touched on the World Health Organization, and there's something significant going on right now with their 2005 international health regulations, which are now being updated. And they're changing the language of those regulations and taking that which used to be non-binding and making it binding. So when the World Health Organization came out and recommended in a non-binding fashion that signatory countries like Canada, that we introduce a vaccine passport, Justin Trudeau and the premiers and everyone just said, well, as per World Health advice, following World Health advice. But the new agreement that they're authoring as we speak, and from what I understand, and I heard this anecdotally just tonight at my son's soccer game from a few like-minded parents. We all gathered at one end of the pitch and were having a little conversation. It was really quite, because our group kept growing. It started as 2, then it became 3, then it became 4.
That's fantastic.
6 of us, yeah. And it was wonderful. At any rate, it was being said in our little group that the European Parliament has just signed on to the updated international health regulations, which come out of the World Health Organization. And the way they've written the new regulations, it's binding.
Mhm.
And I don't see Canada as having any hope with Justin
No.
Trudeau
No.
as
No.
the prime minister. And one thing that came out, someone said that Australia did not sign it, that they rejected it. which I-
Interesting.
Now, none of this I have
Is
confirmed.
official.
I heard it tonight
Yeah.
at a soccer game,
Mhm.
it's like internet chatter.
Right.
So, and I haven't had time to go online to verify any of this, and it's hard to find news articles on it.
It is.
But have you been following the updated international health regulations, and what are your thoughts on it?
Okay, so I'm just gathering little bits. Like you said, it's really hard to see. What I've read so far is that yes, there's going to be some sort of an international passport with the vaccines. They're going to be able to kind of, my understanding is that they're going to be able to slip in the COVID vaccine. What that means for like boosters, for traveling and things like that, I'm not sure. But if they introduce the international vaccine passport, it's going to be a huge problem for us, because I agree. I think Canada is going to sign right on. Like Trudeau's definitely
Yeah,
going to
no
sign
doubt.
on for it. He was definitely on board with the whole, as you know, the travel mandates and all that during 2021. So that's a huge issue for sure. And the other thing that I had read was that in any sort of emergency, like health emergency, then the government will be able to introduce mandatory vaccines for the population. And so I was reading that. I don't know how far that's gone. I don't know if it's written and if it's binding yet, but I did read that yesterday. Somebody had sent something over to me, so I was kind of delving into it, but it's really hard to see. I mean, it's these little things that are slipped through, and if you're not on top of it, or you don't catch it, or you don't read those documents, you miss it. And the majority of the population don't.
Right.
No, not at all. Yeah.
So, and then all of a sudden it's introduced, and it's like, oh, okay, well, must be for our safety.
And it'll come to the US too. US won't be
Definitely.
able to escape this illusion of Republicans, Democrats. They're all, it's all just a dog and pony show, in my opinion. And so
100%. And like I was talking to a couple of like-minded friends as well, and they were just saying, where do you want to be when this all hits? Like where, because we were talking about potentially going back to the Middle East, because to be honest, we're sick of taxes here. Like it is crazy. I'm not sure if you know, the Middle East is tax-free.
Yep.
So everything you earn, you get to take home, and then everything is privatized, which we loved.
And it's in US dollars.
It's in US dollars. So, I mean, the schools were phenomenal. The healthcare was top notch.
Yeah.
And so we really missed that. We really missed taking home our entire salary. Like we haven't paid taxes in 13 years and we're like, what the heck? So we were thinking of going back, but my friend mentioned, like, do you want to be stuck there when this all goes belly up? And that's a good point as well. Like not in your own country. I don't know.
Because you cannot be a citizen of Bahrain, Saudi Arabia.
No.
And what happens is, what I know of, though, the reason I'm so familiar with the Emirate States is because a large number of Indians, and it's typically India, they're highly educated individuals who get their PhDs in whatever, or engineering degrees, and they go to work in Bahrain, Abu Dhabi, Saudi, because it's an opportunity to work in their field. Right. And they'll quite often be two incomes, making six figures plus each. They work there for 10 or more years. If they invest their money well, they can, after a few years, have a few $1 million. But now you can't retire in Bahrain. You can't stay there. And so now you have to, now you were fortunate in that you're a Canadian citizen, so you come back home. But a lot of Indians don't want to go back to India, so they start looking typically to the United States, Canada, or Australia.
Right. Right.
That's one of the reasons our real estate market is so elevated, is you have all this money coming in, often from the Middle East. And $2 million for that house, I'll buy two.
Exactly. Exactly. No, definitely. And like another thing that we had looked at is potentially going down to Costa Rica because my in-laws retired there about 13, 14 years ago. And funny enough, they were wide awake back then.
Mm.
And like my husband he was awake. So he's like, yeah, they make sense. My in-laws were ranting to me and I'm like, they are all crazy. Like, wow.
Wow.
Everything that they had said has come to fruition. They're self-sufficient down there. They're living in their own
Nice.
compounds. They have their own, like they have a farmer down the road that they get their meat and their eggs from.
Mhm.
They have all their fruits and vegetables in their garden. I mean, they're fine. They're absolutely fine.
I've heard of a lot of people. Costa Rica seems to be a very popular destination for those who've had their eyes open for a while, and it's kind of like their ark. And
It really is. Yeah. And my father-in-law was so smart and he bought a massive, massive plots of land and he developed them and sold them to people in primarily North America. And he said it was like selling like hot potatoes during the pandemic because people were just buying property like crazy.
so where do you think we're going? I mean, we're right now, people are seeing the potential for the declaration of a climate emergency.
Mm-hmm.
We have a new shot that it was all over the mainstream media advising Canadians that you're going to need to get up to date on your latest COVID shot come the fall. And where do you see things going in the next, say, rest of this year, 2023?
I mean, I try to be positive, but I think we need to be prepared. I 100% think we need to be prepared. I think we need to be prepared for more mandates, whether that be with the new COVID vaccine, or whether that be with climate lockdowns. I think that I'm very much solution based. I try to find a solution, like how can I make a difference? How can I make a dent? I think we need to keep speaking up. I think we need to keep trying to wake up as many people as we can. But with that said, I also think we need to be prepared.
Well, you're doing a fantastic job on your Instagram account. How many followers do you have on Instagram?
Just over 31,000 now.
Yeah.
Wow. Unreal.
I mean, I started with 175, not even 7 months ago.
Wow,
and those were mostly friends.
Right.
And I probably lost most of them.
No.
You might be surprised.
Yeah.
You might be surprised. I'm too old for Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
I'm on Facebook and Twitter and Reddit. But the number of people who come up to me and tell me, it shocks me, the number of people who come up to me in my little town of 12,000 people in southeastern Ontario, who will come up and say, I read what you wrote on Facebook and I really agree. But then they say, but I'm not going to comment or like or anything like that because I own a business, because whatever the reason, they don't want to be out front.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
We need more of us willing, like yourself, to be up front. Mark, you got any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And we have to be, solution-based. You hit it right on the nose, self-sufficient. And we have to stop relying on people, politicians, this person, RFK Jr., you name it, to save us, because it's not going to happen. That's not the way. So
right. Exactly.
So people want to engage with Kristen McLean. We'll be putting the links up.
Yeah.
You have your Instagram account. Are you on any other platforms?
At the moment, no. I do have a Twitter, but I'm not really active on it. I'm actually my husband said you need to get on Twitter. So I said, fine, you run my account. I am so busy on Instagram.
Yeah, I know.
So yeah, definitely contact me on Instagram.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Anything else you want to promote at all, or no?
Yeah, well, you'll see a lot on Instagram. I do promote. So we are buying from, it's called The Wellness Company. It's the Wellness Box. It's a Patriot-owned all-American company based in the US. So we've decided to stop giving our money to these giant conglomerates that are promoting these crazy agendas. And so we buy all our products from there, or all our household products. I have all the information on my Instagram. So if you are open or interested in that, just follow me on Instagram. Happy to give you more information, but it's Patriot owned, and they're products that are safer for your home and family. So we feel really comfortable buying from them, safer, and it's not promoting or supporting crazy agendas.
Yes.
We'll
Excellent.
wrap it up with the standard invitation to like, to share, to subscribe.
Right.
This is
Yeah.
a new channel that Mark has started,
Gordon and I, yeah. So
and he's the brains. I'm just a mouthpiece.
yeah, right. All right. Well, we really appreciate it, Kristen. This was great.
Thanks so much for having me. It was so
Yeah.
nice to meet you guys.
Yeah.